Is it Takoma?
Hey, Michael.
Okay.
Michael Rubin. Adam, good to see you. Well,
Hello.
welcome. Hey, Michael. Hey, Ajmel. Get started in a few minutes. Ajmel, did you cut your hair down?
I did. It was a mess.
Looks nice. Hello, Sadie.
Hi.
How's everything going? Kiminori, how are you? He's still connected to audio. Awesome. I think we can start the broadcast and start letting folks in from the public, and then we can get started in a minute. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to the Takoma Park Reimagine Public Safety meeting. This will be our second community listening session with a task force who's reimagining public safety and coming up with recommendations to the City Council. Is here to listen to the community, get input. We'll let a few more folks from the community join, and then we'll get started and kick us off for the night. Awesome. So I think we'll get started. I think as a starter, we'll go around and do a bit of introductions so you all from the community can get to know who your task force members are and representatives are here to listen to you and get your feedback, your opinions, and your thoughts to help inform the recommendations. And then you'll get to hear from your vice mayor and council member Siemens. But before we kick it off, let's go ahead and do a round robin of introductions, and I'll toss it over. But I'll start. My name is Jamal Holtz. I'm a lead facilitator, co-facilitator with Link Strategic Partners, and I'll toss it over to my colleague Cordell.
Good afternoon, everyone, or I should say evening. Cordell Carter from Expectant Advisory. Cheers.
Mr. Aiken.
Hi, I'm Michael Aiken with Link Strategic Partners. I'm going to be moderating our Q&A a bit later today. If you have questions for us, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can also use the chat function, which will send stuff directly to the panelists. And if you'd like to speak later in the meeting, just use the raised hand function, and we'll bring you on screen to ask your question. So looking forward to a good night. Jamal?
Molly.
Hey everyone, Molly Mitzner. If you have any questions or tech issues, you can let me know. Director of Community Engagement at Link Strategic Partners.
Awesome. And let's kick it over to our task force members that are represented today. Ajmal, if you want to kick us out with your name and the ward you live in, and why you and your wife were joining the task force.
Hi, everybody. Ajmal Qureshi, career civil rights lawyer, Ward 3. Grateful to be here today, and I think that I'm increasingly interested, now that we're pretty far in the process, to talk to many of you outside of this particular forum. And so I'm going to take a little bit of a risk and give you all my email address for anybody who doesn't have it. It's just my first name, my middle initial, which is A, and then my last name @gmail.com. And feel free to reach out to me. I think I'm getting to a place where, I have some concrete ideas now, and I think that I want to talk to as many people as possible, to the extent there's interest. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Mr. Rubin.
I'm Michael Rubin, a resident of Ward 2. Work for a local nonprofit, Impact Silver Spring. The reason I wanted to join the task force is I represent Impact on the Silver Spring Justice Coalition and have been interested in public safety issues for a number of years. And I think Takoma Park is really well positioned to experiment a little bit and try some new things out that could be a model for the county and for other places.
Thank you. Kiminori. We'll jump back to you, Kiminori. Jumana, I know you're cooking up dinner.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I am cooking dinner. Jumana Musa. I am a 20-year resident of Ward 6. Lived in the same place the whole time. And I am on this task force because I'm raising my kids here. And I, in my professional life, I've worked on issues of policing and enforcement and all of that. And I want to make it useful to the community I live in. And I agree with Michael. I think we have an opportunity here to set the bar high in terms of how this can be done in Takoma Park. And I'd like to be a part of that.
Awesome. Thank you, Jumana. Kiminori.
Is it just an introduction?
Yep. Intro, your name, ward, and why.
Yeah, Kiminori Nakamura here, Ward 6. I'm a assistant research professor, University of Maryland, criminology and criminal justice. So I do, criminal justice sort of empirical, data-driven research. Sometimes with police departments, correction departments, parole probation, and in Maryland and other states as well. So I'm trying to. I'm hoping that that background can help contribute to this task force and make Takoma Park feel safer for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiminori. Adam.
Hi, everyone. Adam Braskich, resident of Ward 6. I'm a federal prosecutor, former police officer. I've been interested in public safety reform and police reform in particular for a number of years, and I'm hoping, like Kiminori said, to draw on my own background and try to make some valuable contributions, and also try to make Takoma Park a model, as some of the other members have said, for other jurisdictions.
Thank you. Cedric.
Good afternoon. Cedric Boatman, longtime resident actually almost for 25 years. I grew up in Takoma Park, and then I just live right outside. I live in Silver Spring now, down near downtown. and through my father and the work he's done for the Takoma Park community and all the work he's done, Terry Seaman asked me to join the task force and see what I can contribute, my contributions to it. And so I told him I would. I've been in law enforcement. I've worked for other company, and I've also been with Montgomery County Public Schools as the district supervisor for security for the last going on 30 years now. Be 30 years coming up this next school semester.
Awesome. And then finally, Sadie.
Hi, my name's Sadie Cheston Harris. I live in Ward 3. I was born and raised in Takoma Park and currently attend UNC Chapel Hill. And I got interested in improving public safety while at UNC, trying to improve mental health resources for students, specifically get dispatch options that were unarmed to students, and wanted to translate that work over here.
Awesome. Thank you, Sadie. And before we jump into the meat of tonight's discussion, I want to hand it over to our guest for tonight, Councilmember Siemens, to kind of give us an intro in the charge of this task force.
Thank you, Joel, and welcome everybody. I really appreciate your taking the time out of your evening for this opportunity. I especially want to give a shout out to the task force members who have put in so many evenings and so much work on this project. You know, the City Council has formed this task force to reimagine public safety, and that's with an emphasis on the police, but there's other areas of the city government that may be involved in public safety, and so I'm thankful that we're looking at all those things. Tonight's listening session is important. It's important to hear from the community. We had one previously, and I want everybody who came to speak tonight to remember that you know, there's a lot of issues going on around the country with public safety, and it's important though, as we listen tonight, that we're hearing about what your experiences are here in Takoma Park, or what your ideas or desires are to make Takoma Park public safety better. Because the task force has a lot on their agenda, but they're not able to solve all the problems nationwide. We have to stick with Takoma Park. So anyways, thank you for coming, and I'll leave you as much time as possible to get the work done. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Council Member. So let's jump a bit into process, timeline, and kind of where we've been and where we're going. So my colleague will share a deck here to jump us in. So you got a bit of the purpose, timeline, and where we are. So we extended this task force for an extra month of June to really take more time to gauge community feedback, set up sessions like this, and to thoroughly take a dive into the recommendations and come up with recommendations that we think best reflect community needs and community issues and problems. So we're spending much more time doing that and connecting with subject matter experts and connecting with people like you all who live in this community, other community, to really inform the recommendations and process. Next slide, please. So how we got here, where we are, we kicked this process off April 29th, a few months ago, back in March. Where we are now, April 29th, we hosted our last community listening session to gauge community feedback and get comments from the community to inform the work that we're doing here on the task force. May 4th, we heard from Chief Duvall as he gave an overview of arrest data in Takoma Park from 2015 to 2020 and took questions from the task force members. And then we then heard from the city manager to give us an overview of the city's budget and took questions from the task force members, but took a dive into some of the policing budget, but also what the city spends money on and where the city gets its dollars from a federal, state, and local standpoint. And then moving forward to May 11th, subcommittees, we continue to do subcommittee meetings, and they took a dig into the data to identify subject matter expert specifics to their focus areas and roles. And next slide, please. And then May 18th, the subcommittees reported on their process and the progress that we've made over the past few months, who we heard from, what we're hearing, some of the things we want to start focusing on as subcommittees and as a task force. The task force and attendees then heard from subject matter experts that were requested, such as Claudia Tolson from the Takoma Park Police Department. She's the victim witness coordinator. So we kind of heard some of the demands and needs that she aspired for in that role. And then we heard from Dr. Simone Walton, mental health, who is the mental health subcommittee lead on the Montgomery County Task Force, and runs her own company and business and does a lot of engagement around mental health supports. So it was good to hear from those two folks. Next slide. May 25th, the subcommittees worked to further refine recommendations developing from the research. So after we've heard from subject matter experts and we invited more subject matter experts in to kind of refine the conversations and what we were hearing and kind of take a deeper dive into some of the recommendations, draft recommendations. So we heard from Dara Baldwin, who is the Director of National Policy and Center for Disability Rights, Bernice Maruku North from the North Law Group, and she was also the co-chair of the Montgomery County Task Force. Mark Maurer, who was the Senior Advisor at the Citizen Project and was also the co-chair of the Montgomery County Task Force. Donna Wright, who is the City of Takoma Park Communications Specialist. Andrew Powell, who is the Deputy Chief and Internal Affairs Representative. And then Dan Frischkorn, who's the captain with the Takoma Park Police Department. And then lastly, Jessica Clark, the City of Takoma Park Deputy City Manager. So we heard from these folks. Next slide, please. Community quality of life is one of the subcommittees that and focus areas for this task force. This subcommittee really focused on the quality of life issues such as housing, mental health, employment, and all the things and way of living for people who live in the city of Takoma Park. So they've been talking about things such as city programs, policies, and budget that really affect the people who live in the city of Takoma Park. Here are some of the focus areas within that subcommittee. So mental health and substance abuse have been some part of the conversation, civic participation, housing and homelessness, and budgeting and funding. Next slide, please. Here's some of the initial questions in discussion points we want to toss over to you all as attendees for this discussion is, how are community complaints and concerns responded to? What are the biggest areas of concern that you have as it relates to community quality of life? What are areas to focus on for community quality of life that the subcommittee should focus on? Next slide, please. And then I'll toss it over to my colleague, Cordell, who leads the Alternative Methods and Responses Subcommittee.
Yes, this committee is designed to look at current policing practices for emergency and non-emergency calls, including calls about mental health. We look at various processes, also training. This is a question that's come up many, many times. We have a fantastic 4 committee members in Michael Rubin, G-Day, Sadie, and Cedric, who you'll hear from later today. And on to, Jevin is not here, so I'm assuming Jamal again. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, this is you, Cordell.
Great. So here are some of the focus areas that we've covered. Service calls, the technology involved, potential implementation of a non-emergency number. For instance, in Virginia, there's 211, and other places in Montgomery County, there's 311. And the disposition of the K9 unit has come up many times as well. Yes, so we've heard a lot about a dispatch operation. We know that there is a new dispatch center coming. And in fact, members of our committee will be visiting the current setup so that we can see the situation. But we're very interested in how other municipalities like Rockville and Gaithersburg are handling this issue. They're similarly situated in terms of jurisdiction as Takoma Park. And moreover, how are special teams trained on policing? What actually happens in a non-emergency call? How often are those calls going to police officers rather than someone that can help on other issues? hand it over to Jamal.
Awesome. And then community engagement and transparency, the subcommittee that I lead with Lauren, Adam, and Jumana and Kim and Nori. This subcommittee really evaluated practices and policies related to data, budget, and really how the city informs the public on and engage the public on many different issues and how the city communicates with the public. Additionally, the subcommittee focused on approaches to recruiting and retaining public safety professionals. Next slide, please. Some of the focus areas we've been talking about and focusing on is transparency and policies for all agencies and departments, transparency around complaints and how to handle oversight, body cam policy going forward, move activities not part of police and out of the police department. So things such as there's been discussion around crossing guards or code enforcement, whether or not those things should be within the police department. And then lastly, improve city communications with the public. Press release statements, newsletters, citywide alert communication systems. Are those effective or are they not? Are there things we can build upon with those systems and things we can improve upon with making those systems more effective? Next slide, please. Awesome. So here's some of the initial questions or feedback we want to gauge around community engagement and transparency. What are the most effective ways for a community and the city to communicate and engage with each other? What policies, legislation, initiatives are needed to address transparency? What can we know about what police officers are trained to do relative to what they are asked to do? So these are just some brain teasers and questions we want to kind of get started to inform our discussion. So we'll close it out here with the PowerPoint, and really we want to hand it over to the community members that have joined us today. So I wanted my colleague Michael Aiken will lead us through comments, Q&A in that portion, but I want to open it up to you all now. If there are any questions, comments, feedback, or things you want to share with the subcommittee, with the task force here while you're attending. So open it up to the folks who are in the room. And if you want to come off camera, please let us know that we can allow that as well.
Thank you, Jamal. Before we jump in there, task force members, subcommittee members, anything else that wasn't reported out by the facilitators that you think is important context, or did that capture the breadth of your discussion so far? Anything anyone wants to add? Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. So for those watching, feel free to use the Q&A feature on the bottom, use the chat feature, or just raise your hand and we'll promote you to a panelist. And you can either come on video if you want, or you can just stay on audio if you want, whatever is comfortable for you all. Do you have any questions or comments? We'll also drop into the chat box here the public feedback form, which you can use to submit feedback to us outside of this as well. Every bit of feedback is set to the task force members to inform their work. Excellent. Tom asked, what input have rank and file Takoma Park officers have you solicited, and what have officers told you? Excellent question. There were 2 focus groups done with Takoma Park police officers. We did one to capture folks who were working night shift and one to capture folks who were working day shift. From what I understand, those were opened up to the entire police department for anyone who wanted to attend. A focus group report was written with the feedback from that, and that's all been made available to the task force members. It was pretty extensive feedback. It would be unfair to try and summarize all of it in a quick blip, but they were extensive focus groups, and we covered everything from what is the experience of being a police officer? How long have you been on the force? What has changed during your time on the force? We had some really insightful discussions around what things are police responding to that don't feel like they should be police response types issues. And those were really interesting discussions that informed the larger look at public safety. So it was a pretty wide ranging discussion, but any task force members want to share anything that they took away from those focus group reports or anything else on that topic? Perfect. We're asking if we can share the report. We've got a whole public folder of documents. I don't know where this one lives currently, but we'll get that information and make sure we're sharing it out to you. I can also go much more into specifics on this, but I want to make sure I'm not speaking for the task force. Jumana, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, for the folks who are on, if they're not aware, and maybe you can sort of help them find, there's also all of the sort of whole committee, the whole task force sessions have been recorded, and I know there's a way to access them. I don't know if there's an easy way to let people know how to do that in case they want to go back and look at any of this as well.
Absolutely. Team, if you could drop in the link in the chat box to where people can access the resources that have been made public, we'll make sure that is out there. Anyone else have anything they want to add to that one? I can give you, I conducted these focus groups with a team of people, so I'm happy to give you some of the highlights from it. And again, this is my version of it, and we'll make sure that we provide something more full. But we had some really interesting conversations about how being a police officer has changed over the decades. We had some folks who'd been on the force for decades. We had some folks who had joined within the last year. We had some folks who were very young and some folks who are at the very near end of their career. So I felt like as a researcher, it was a pretty broad representation of perspectives. I also felt like we were getting some pretty candid feedback. Anytime you're working within an organization that has kind of a reporting structure, I always, as an outside researcher, have a fear of, are people able to be as open as they need to be in these situations? But I felt like we were getting really honest feedback from the brand new folks, as well as the ones who'd been there for a while. One of the themes that you saw show up in some of the subcommittee report outs already is that whole idea of what are we calling police for that really shouldn't be police related type things. There was a lot of discussion among the police force themselves on how many of their calls are dealing with folks that are in some version of mental health crisis, or folks that maybe have a civil dispute with a neighbor that really doesn't rise to a policing level. But everyone, I think the direct quote was, we're all trained from the time we can talk that you call 911 anytime you need support. So 911 becomes the catch-all, and then the police are who are dispatched when calls come in. And so often police officers are responding to situations that probably don't need a police response, but they're the ones who took the call and responded. There was a discussion around some of it was deemed like social work related calls where someone's water may have been turned off. That's not a police issue at all, but they called, and the police officer is the one who responded and is trying to connect them with resources. Questions about how we can kind of get those more upstream so they don't require a police response for that level of detail. Michael, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just one small thing. I mean, in addition to the data that we got, we were offered the opportunity to do ride-alongs with the police officer. So I'm going to be doing one during night shift this weekend. So it's one data point, but hopefully it'll increase the knowledge that I have on what the officers are dealing with day to day.
The other thing I should mention, because it came up and we did these groups independent of each other, there was discussions around the pay scales. There was the discussions around community-based policing. There was some discussions in both groups around how Takoma Park is not necessarily the most affordable place for its police officers to live. They make too much to qualify for affordable housing and not enough to live in non-subsidized housing in Takoma Park. So that was raised. There were some discussions around what happens kind of at the end of your time as a police officer, and how police officers in Takoma Park don't have health care in retirement. It's not part of their service package. So does that lend itself to people staying longer because they need the health coverage when maybe they should, they have a desire to not be an officer for as long as they are. So we got into some really interesting discussions around that. There was a lot of discussions around recruiting and why people would want to come to work for a rather small full service police force and versus not, some of the pros and cons of that. There were discussions around recruitment challenges. I don't think it's unfair to say that there was a discussion around just a really low morale in police departments in general, and specifically in Takoma Park at this moment. So that's some of the details. Happy to do more if there's more specifics, but I think that captures kind of by and large the tenor of the discussion. Other questions, please. Tom is asking how many cops participated in the focus groups and did you discuss de-escalation and use of force? Team, I'm going to need your help with this. I believe it was probably 16 officers across the two groups. I believe there was 8 in one and 6 or 8 in the other. I believe that was the number. And we talked about policing in general. There wasn't a long discussion on specific use of force policies in these focus groups. There was a discussion about how the officers felt like they're often making split-second decisions with the best information they have, and how training prepares them for that or doesn't, and kind of what happens in those moments. So there wasn't a major point of the discussion, but it was certainly touched upon in regards to training. Other questions? And if anyone wants to ask a question or have a dialogue, just put your hand up and we're happy to bring you on the screen as well. Cedric, go for it, sir.
Real quick, in these sessions that you have with the officers, they weren't recorded, were they? They weren't recorded sessions, were they? No, I thought so. I thought so. It was all the information that you had put into that you'd given us, written information. Okay.
That's correct, Cedric. And that's been the case for all of the focus groups. So when I say we did focus groups with officers, that was one set of focus groups. We've also done focus groups with residents. We've done focus groups with business leaders. We've done focus groups with education leaders. There was a pretty extensive stakeholder audit process at the beginning. And the commitment that's made to everyone is that none of these comments will be personally identifiable, and that we will write a thematic report of everything we heard, just to make sure that folks are able to open up and share their
Right. I understand the confidentiality. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cedric. Wayne would like to ask a question. So we're going to bring you up, Wayne, if you want to unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
My name is Wayne Sherwood, and I was in contact with Molly earlier, and she said that maybe after the regular questions, I have a statement I'd like to make, sort of like testifying before the city council or something like that. But if there are more people that have questions, then maybe they should go first.
Wayne, you've got the floor, sir. So go ahead and give us your statement. That would be very helpful.
Okay. Well, we're always warned to stick within 3 minutes when we go to the city council, and I've tried to do that. And so here goes. My name is Wayne Sherwood. I live on Grand Avenue in Ward 1 in Takoma Park. I've lived here since 1981. I would like to thank you, the members of the task force, for performing this important service to the community. You're a highly qualified group of people, and you bring a wide array of knowledge, commitment, and experience to this work. I wish, however, that your deliberations had been more open to the public since you began meeting earlier this spring. Apparently, whoever planned things decided to keep most of your discussions almost entirely bottled up. I think that was unfortunate. In other communities across the country, which have established public safety task forces over the past year, their deliberations have been much more open and public. This has allowed a variety of opinions to come out and be discussed. There's no community anywhere where everybody agrees on all of these things. So it's important for people throughout the community to be able to speak out about their differences and have a forum where they can discuss them. Such community discussions can draw people of goodwill together so they can find areas of agreement as to what are some of the most important things that need to be done in the near term, and also identify areas where there might be less agreement and need longer term discussions or research. I am glad that you've been getting some outside expertise to come before the task force in recent weeks, and that you've been digging more deeply into a number of issues. I would like to mention 4 examples. First, to what extent do you agree with the recommendations that the Montgomery County Public Safety Force came up with in its recent report? What do the county task force co-chairs expect to happen next in the way of implementation timetables and budgets? Do you think that their recommendations regarding policing are going to be implemented? Do you see any possible role for the city of Takoma Park to play, for example, in advocating on behalf of or helping to implement these recommendations? Second, what kinds of calls come into the police department dispatcher? Where do the largest number of calls come from geographically? How many of these involve some kind of domestic violence or mental health crises? Could the latter be diverted to some agency other than the police force? I mean, these are the questions you've been asking and talking about. What kinds of situations develop when persons with disabilities, such as those who are sight or hearing impaired or who have mental health problems, are engaged by the police? Third, the task force has done some surveys of what the residents of many of the multifamily properties in Takoma Park think and want. What have those surveys showed? Are most multifamily residents satisfied with the safety in their buildings currently? Do they want their own building management to do more in the way of safety and security? Do they want the Takoma Park Police Department to provide more help and support to their buildings? What kinds of help and support? What kinds of sensitive issues arise in these situations, and are there ways that can be dealt with better? For example, there may be some undocumented immigrants who are sensitive about who comes exploring and investigating things. Fourth, and finally, to what extent do social and economic conditions contribute to problems involving public safety in Takoma Park? Many so-called safety problems are really symptoms of deeper underlying problems, such as poverty, sickness, unemployment, high housing costs, school dropouts, lack of computer skills, or internet broadband access. To what extent can public safety in Takoma Park be improved by providing more services in underserved buildings or neighborhoods? In conclusion, I would like to make the following recommendation to you. Please try to reach some agreement amongst yourselves upon a relatively short list of things you would like to see the Takoma Park City Council act upon soon. Please highlight these recommendations in a relatively brief summary report that can be distributed widely to the public soon in an easy to read form. The City Council will soon be considering what to do with over $7 million in incoming ARPA funds this year, with another $7 million expected to arrive a year from now. It's possible that the City Council could use a significant proportion of these new ARPA funds to address public safety, policing, educational, and social issues in Takoma Park. Please point out where you think that could be useful. We have a way in Takoma Park of talking things to death without taking action, believe it or not. I'm concerned that the City Council could take a long time to do anything with your report after receiving it. The council could put your report on the shelf and say, maybe it will have time to read it this fall after we have a new city manager, and then praise you and say, thank you very much for your service and wave you goodbye. That would be very disappointing to me. Give us a ball we could run with sooner rather than later. If you provide a summary of your major recommendations for the City Council to act upon soon, for example, within the next months, that would be very helpful. It would give people in the community who are interested in and concerned about these issues the ability to come together around your recommendations and advocate for their adoption by the City Council in the near future. You could also prepare a second, longer supplemental report that had included a lot of the reference material, data, surveys, studies, etc., that you have gathered. And you can include in that longer supplement some broader, more general recommendations in a wider variety of areas, including for follow-up, more discussions, more research to be done later. Thank you again for your service.
Thank you so much, Wayne. That was incredibly helpful. Task force members, any follow-up questions for Wayne? Okay, perfect. Wayne, that was great. We captured all of that. Two things from a timeline standpoint. As Jamal mentioned at the beginning, the work of the task force is extended by 1 month, but the report is still due to the council by the beginning of July to inform the American Rescue Plan Fund. So that was spot on in the recommendation. And we are planning another public forum in mid-June. The date is not fully set yet. That'll be around recommendations, where that summary document you asked for would be really helpful. Here are some of the proposed recommendations. Let's vet them for some public feedback. And then in the chat box, for anyone who hasn't been able to follow the public meetings, we know we've had a lot of them every Tuesday night. We've put a link to where you can find the summary reports and videos from those. So excellent, excellent feedback. David, we're going to go to you next. David, we're going to bring you on screen, And if you'd like to come on video, great. And if not, feel free to use your audio. Go for it.
Hi, I'd be glad to come on screen. I don't see something for me to press for that purpose.
Molly's doing it right now. But we can hear you loud and clear, David. There we go. We can see you and hear you. Take it away.
Hi, so I'm David Borden. I've lived in Takoma Park since 2005, the last several years in the Flower Sligo area. Professionally, I run the group stopthedrugwar.org, which I founded. I was glad, although not at all surprised, that one of the experts you've consulted with is Mark Maurer. Mark's work goes back decades and, in my opinion, for a long time served as one of the underpinnings of criminal justice reform efforts before as many people got interested in it as are today. Mark has pointed out something that a concept that often has gotten lost, and speaking on the level of prison and incarceration, Mark has pointed out, in order to reduce the number of people in prison, it's necessary to arrest and prosecute fewer people, and on average to incarcerate people who do incarcerate for shorter periods of time. It's common, has been common, at least in the past, for people to talk about the need to invest in communities, provide alternatives so fewer people get involved in crime. And of course, that's tremendously important for any number of reasons. But it does not guarantee that fewer people will get arrested, fewer people will end up in prison or be in prison for less time, because the latter are policy choices and practices of legislators, police leaders, rank and file officers. Now, similarly, for policing, the current police reform movement and this this task force have an important part of this built in, it seems, to the mission, which is there's a clear effort to find ways to reduce encounters between police and other members of the public. It's also important to think about when an encounter does happen. There are some where presumably there will continue to be encounters, some of which, maybe we don't want to stop, but what happens then? When does an officer make an arrest? And are there practices, procedures now, written or habit, when arrests are made, or tickets written when maybe they don't necessarily have to be? I'll bring up two areas that I won't claim to be the top most consequential ones necessarily, but they make a point. One is marijuana law violations, which have been decriminalized in Maryland and are tickets now when they're below a certain level, at least. And we used to have our share of marijuana arrests in Takoma Park. We used to have more arrests for other drugs. Those have come down. I was really glad to see when I looked at our uniform crime reports data. Many of the marijuana arrests have turned into tickets, and I don't know what reporting exists on those encounters, if there's the type of data gathered for them that there is for arrests that go into the UCR system. And maybe some of you here know that. So these tickets were these people who were flaunting their marijuana use in public spaces, making people uncomfortable, doing other things that they shouldn't have been doing? Or is there a mindset that you catch someone with marijuana, you write a ticket, less damaging to a person than an arrest will be? What's the racial breakdown? Is it still overwhelmingly Black people who are being ticketed, as Black and brown, as was the case with the arrests? I'm asking these questions. I've had limited time to pursue my own research in this. Another something as I think about, there's an annual click it or ticket campaign to encourage people to wear seatbelts. My understanding is there's some evidence supporting its effectiveness. But I also wonder, would warnings do just as well? And who's getting the tickets? Is it primarily people who have the least money to pay? And maybe Terry remembers this emails from a few years ago when I asked what the practices are. Are Tacoma officers in this annual campaign? Are they opting for warnings in any case when it's appropriate? Or are they doing tickets? And there wasn't an actual answer about that from the chief. The only answer was writing tickets isn't the only thing they're doing. And I don't know, there might not be any data on will this campaign be as effective with just warnings, but I guess maybe that's more detail than needed for tonight. But arrests, tickets, any punitive measures, how much can we dispense with?
Yep.
I think, and so as I noted before, there is a clear intention here to reduce police encounters, but it's also important to look at what happens when encounters do happen. And we're taking on a long-standing culture in policing. These things don't change easily, even with the best of intentions, and it's easy to miss. So
thank you, David.
So specificity in the changes we seek.
I appreciate that. That level of detail is really helpful. Adam dropped into the chat box where you can find some of the numbers on civil marijuana citations. But all of what you shared is really helpful. Task force members, any follow-up questions for David? Excellent. Thank you so much, David. Cordell, I'm going to go to you next, sir.
Yes, everyone. I think it would be remiss if we didn't give one of our task force members, Mr. Boatman, an opportunity to just talk about his vantage point as a current law enforcement officer for Montgomery Public Schools, but more importantly, a former law enforcement officer for the Takoma Park, long-term resident. He's seen this thing called public safety from a variety of vantage points and has added so much value to my own understanding of this work. So, Mr. Boatman, if you can just give us a few minutes just about how you've seen public safety change and what do you think some of the key issues are in that regard as we talk about reforming.
Okay. Well, yesterday, first of all, the group I'm with, I like Michael and Sadie and everybody who's in our group. One, I haven't had, when I first started, the first thing I looked up was the report that they gave us from Prince George's County. It was this big, thick report. And then I thought about something. I said, well, Takoma Park is unique. It's different. It's smaller. It's not Montgomery County. It's not PG County. And the short stint I had in law enforcement was in PG County. And so I'm looking at it, I'm trying to look at it from a different lens. And I've seen Takoma Park, born here. I came in Takoma Park in 1956. I went to Takoma Park Elementary. Back then it was Takoma Park Junior High School. And then I went on to Blair High School. But I've seen the changes of Takoma Park and how unique it is. And it is very, at this point now, very diverse. Now, because of what I've seen in law enforcement and then what I've seen in the school system, there are parallels there. When we look at, since the George Floyd incident, that's kind of brought all these discussions all across the country up, and then how do we go into reform, or how do we change our particular jurisdiction? And this is what, or municipalities, this is what everybody's talking about across the country. One of the things that I've seen is this. Yesterday, Sadie brought something to my mind that really jarred me. She was talking about school systems and how the interaction is there. When you look at it, for the most part, the way I'm seeing it through my lens now is this. The parallel is pretty much the same for Black, brown, and some poor whites. When we look at it from the standpoint that from kindergarten to high school, your authority is the principal. It's the principal. Your consequences are suspension or expulsion. And then when you look at it as you become an adult, it is the police, the judge, and then prison. When you look at it, those parallels are there. And I think what the country in itself, or what, let me stay in the compound, what we need to look at is kind of look at how those parallels, how they parallel each other, and the similarities to that, and how can that be changed? Because a lot of this that we're talking about is based on our attitudes towards one another. And I say this all the time. When I had the boys group for Montgomery County Public Schools, I had a summer group, and we took, I say disadvantage, maybe not the proper word I like to use, but we took young men that struggle academically, socially in the school system, and I ran a summer camp. And what we did was, it was a summer camp of life skills. That's what it was. It wasn't about playing a lot of basketball, football. We did some of those things, but it was a summer life skills camp. And so what we wanted to do is talk about some of the things, just what we're talking about now, how the police affected them. How do you interact around the police? How do you interact around home with your parents? All those things. And what I'm seeing right now between the school system and adulthood are the same thing. When a child is Black and brown, is treated differently in the school system, they're gonna have those same attitudes they're gonna face when they become adulthood, and when they're out interacting with law enforcement, the judicial system, and then you have to deal with prison. And so I think for this task force, for our group, we can, Sadie looked really outside the box when she was talking yesterday. We may need to look, school systems wasn't really part of this as far as my understanding when we came in our group, but that's something that we can maybe have a recommendation to any of the educators that are stakeholders that are part of this, that to look at how do we handle kids at an earlier age? Because that's where you need to start. You have to start there and then look at your long-term, your 5-year program, your 10-year program, and then what takes you out of high school, and then that's your 4-year program, because 9th grade to 12. And then you get a better understanding of change there, because that's what we're looking at with the group, my office, we're looking at that now, trying to, we're talking to look at kindergarten. How do we handle kindergartners? What are we saying to them? How are we treating them? Especially the Black and the brown and the disadvantaged poor whites. How we treat them, because they are treated differently. That is the reality. And we have to try to face how we see people, and we all of us see everything through a different lens. Our lenses are different depending on our experiences. We're all a product of our home life. So whatever your home life was, you're a product of that. Whether you liked it or not, you're a product of that. And then you bring that outside your home into the social aspect of where your environment is, whether school, private school, whatever. And so I think that's where we need to really kind of look at that. I'm looking at how Takoma Park has changed in a lot of ways. I lived on Ritchie Avenue. I think that's Ward, I don't know, what is that, 6? 3. And I can remember my family was one of the few first Black families on Ritchie Avenue. There weren't many of us. And some of the things we had to deal with, I mean, back then it was what it was. Quick example, when I was at Takoma Park Elementary School, I was on my way walking to school one day. I was stopped by 2 gentlemen, they were white, and they weren't gonna let me walk from through the wooded area from Takoma Park Junior High to the elementary school. They told me I had to go all the way back around the Piney Branch Road. Well, no, I wasn't having that, I was going through. You know, I wasn't gonna bother anybody, I had the right to walk through. Well, you know, altercation occurred and it wasn't successful for those 2. So I was punished for it. They were let go and I didn't do anything. I didn't start the incident. I was just on my way to school. And so, and that's happened not once or twice, but the way I've been treated, even through the educational system, even up to an adult, has been the same. Even when I was a detective, I was stopped one day, not my jurisdiction. And I let the guy do what he had to do. When he found out I was a cop, he got upset with me and told me why not tell him. I said, I didn't think I needed to tell you. You're gonna do what you need to do. But if you're gonna now treat me different, because when he first was gonna issue me a ticket, he wasn't treating me different, he treated me like a Black man. I'm just going straight out and say it. He treated me nasty, he chastised me, the whole bit. And I said, I didn't say anything. I said, okay. And I said, I'll see you in court. And I won it. But my point is that all of our experiences are different. And I think with the Takoma Park Council and all of us here, we have to look, first of all, within ourselves and look how we see people and our attitude, because that's what will change a lot of this. That's what will change a lot of this, is our attitudes. Even as a Black man, and sometimes when I was a detective, I would look at my own people sometimes in the same way sometimes whites looked at it. Like, okay, he may be up, or she may be up to no good. But that comes from the system, that comes from the time, how I see things in my lens, the media, how we're betrayed in the media. I mean, for a long time, you wouldn't even think a Black person had, you know, a decent job or was successful. And I'm not talking about before the comedy shows and all that. I'm just talking about in general. Because most of the time when you see one of them on TV, how are they portrayed? Ignorant, can't speak.
Definitely appreciate.
So that's why I see it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Cedric.
Yeah.
And now you know why I asked Cedric to represent Ward 4.
Thank you. Thank you for jumping in. Jumana, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to respond to, I think, David, right? There was a couple of things that I know our subcommittee had asked about. One was the question was about the marijuana citations. And this is something I think we need to dig in deeper, right? There's the question of what are they bound to do by law that is beyond anything we can do as a task force. And one of the things that we were told, and I would love to find out that there's more discretion in this, is that even though it's decriminalized, that they're obligated to write these citations. So I have a question on that, because we'd also ask the question about, things like stopping someone for having expired plates, a registration issue, tail light out or something like that. I know Adam looked up the law and it said it wasn't a may, you shall stop somebody in these situations. And so digging into the question of, can that be deprioritized? Can that be something that they say, we're not really looking to do this, or are they absolutely bound by Maryland law? And is there any wiggle room there? But that's one of the barriers that we're running into, is that the laws might say shall rather than may, or not give the leeway for discretion.
Thank you, Jumana. Other questions or comments? I want to make sure we're getting to everyone. Some folks have asked for the public comment form, so we've provided that. Always a great way to send information. But is there anything else? We've got time left today, so I want to make sure that that we're getting all of that. Jumana asked a couple follow-up questions to David. So David, if you have anything that you want to drop in the chat or come back and share with us, more than welcome to do that. Just want to make sure we're getting everyone in. Perfect. David's writing in the chat, Jumana, just in case you can't see it, I feel extremely skeptical about the claim that discretion does not exist in Maryland law over these citations. I confess I don't know for sure. I'll ask colleagues. David, as you find that, and we'll do some of the research on our end as well, please share that with us. We'll make sure it gets to all the task force members.
But just to be clear on the question of, Adam did look up the law on the question of like I said, the headlight or the tail light out, the expired registration, and that language did say shall. Like I said, the outstanding question to me is there still a workaround where you can push discretion in terms of we're not prioritizing that, we're not looking for that. But in terms of the law on the books, it did say shall. We haven't looked up the law on the question of marijuana citations. That's what one of the police officers, I don't remember if it was the police officer or the chief, told us when they were talking to us.
Got it. Any other feedback or comments around that? Excellent. I know everyone has put in a long day and these questions were very, very helpful. So I'm going to leave a little bit more room here. Adam is putting in the chat box the law that Jumana was talking about. So that is there. We will continue to be meeting as a task force every Tuesday evening. We meet in a rotation with full task force 1 week, subcommittees the subsequent week, but even on the subcommittee weeks, we open as a full task force in a public meeting. Summaries from those meetings are made available online soon thereafter, as well as recordings from the sessions. We'll be doing another community listening session, as I mentioned, in late June, and that will be specific to the recommendations that are coming out of the task force. We want to get community feedback on those recommendations before anything is made final and delivered to the council in early July. For those who can't see the chat box, David is writing that in general, it's impossible to have a shall all the time law for police practices because requirements like that would make it impossible for police to prioritize in their work. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll let everyone get on with their evening. Michael, please.
Just a couple of things. I mean, so for the community members who did share, thank you very much. I did want to acknowledge Wayne's comment about transparency. I think that we as task force members didn't have total control over that. We kind of got a system here, and I think that's a fair comment, and it's something that we should consider going forward, maybe beyond the scope of this task force. But if we have a standing committee or something that meets beyond this to ensure that recommendations are carried out, that gets taken into account, because I think that's a very fair point. The other thing I just share for David, who put a couple of comments in the chat. I mean, you know, it's been a little bit of a slow go to get some of the data. We got arrest data pretty quickly and traffic stop data, but we just got the call for service data on May 17th, and that doesn't distinguish by race. So I'm pouring through it still, and it's just challenging to kind of make these decisions when it's been really slow. And I understand that maybe the data wasn't fully available and that the police department needed to like get it for us, and what they did provide was actually very helpful, but it's taking some time to get through, and that's also, you know, a challenge with the tight timetable that we have. So I just want to thank them for sharing and let them know that, you know, those are good points and they are factoring in to some of the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Michael. Really, really important. I think the other thing it's a good note to close on, and it's something that the council member and vice mayor has reminded us often. Once this report comes out, this is not the end of the road. In many ways, it's the start of the road, right? This is recommendations that will inform direct spending decisions and help shape the discussions that have to happen going forward. There's actually a whole part of what the task force has been talking about, which is how do we make sure that happens? How do we make sure that the recommendations, that this doesn't end and go away, become formalized in the recommendations themselves? And I think that's really important. Eric and Wayne, thank you for your comments in the chat. One last call for any last questions or comments. Excellent. Jamal, I'm going to turn it back to you to close us out.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you truly to our community members that showed up today and really shared feedback with the task force members. As I mentioned earlier, this is your feedback is going to be helpful for us as we're continuing our work and starting to craft recommendations, and we want to continue to engage. If there's any further feedback in the chat, again, feel free to use the public comment form to drop any comments or things you want to share with the task force, so they can continue to unpack the feedback shared here, but also beyond. Also share that link with any of your neighbors. Share that link with any of your neighbors and folks who are a part of the city of Takoma Park. So no further, without holding you all any further here, we'll wrap it up and thank you all for attending tonight's meeting.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.